The clerk will now proceed to read the order of the day.
Item 1, resumption of debate on the budget statement.
The question is that Parliament approves the financial policy of the government for the financial year 1st April 2018 to 31st March 2019. Mr. Liang Eng Hwa.
Mr. Speaker, sir, this year's budget sets out the challenges we are facing, how do we respond, and the measures needed, and how do we find means to carry out the comprehensive sets of plans and initiatives in the medium to long term. Deepening economic transformations continue to be the focus, with various schemes streamlined and better integrated, such as the Productivity Solution Grant, PSG, and the Enterprise Development Grant, EDG. The piloting of the open innovation platforms to spur partnerships, and the enhancements of various tax incentives, such as the IP licensing, among others. I will speak on the economic measures during the MTI-COS debate. I'm glad that the introduction of the carbon tax will be phased in gradually to monitor the impact, and applaud the government's commitment that the projected $1 billion revenue collected over the first 5 years will be used to support projects that will achieve greater emissions reductions. I also welcome the measures to further improve social mobility, such as increasing the annual EduSave contributions, updating the income eligibility for EduSave merit bursaries, and enhancing the MOE financial assistance scheme, among others. I believe we can do more on this front. But among the most talked about aspects in this year's budget, of course, is the topic of fiscal sustainability and a 2 percentage point increase in GST. The timing of the GST increase, at least 3 years from now, should not come as a surprise, as both the current and the previous finance minister have already made it quite clear that we do have sufficient revenue to meet the increased expenditure for this term of government. So this increase in GST is not a deferred tax. It is meant to take care of future spending increases beyond 2020. I appreciate the government sharing this way ahead of time so that Singaporeans and businesses can better prepare for the increase. It will also give government time to work on offset schemes to further enhance the progressivity of our GST system, something quite unique to Singapore. We know the reason why we need more revenues. Our expenditures have been rising rapidly, with healthcare and infrastructure spending among the main drivers. In the next decade, this trajectory is likely to continue with even higher healthcare and other recurring expenditures. In some ways, as MPs, we have a part to play in these rising expenditures. To progress as a society and to improve well-being of Singaporeans, we are relentless in pushing for more spending in many areas, such as education, housing, healthcare, transport, and others. We ask for more subsidies to help low and middle-income families. We ask for more facilities in our constituency we represent. It's our duty to improve lives. So I must admit, I'm one of those. For example, I requested to the Minister of Health for a polyclinic in my constituency 3 years ago. I'm glad that construction will start this year. But I know that it will cost the government tens of millions of dollars to build the polyclinic. And when completed, it will incur recurring operating and maintenance expenses in perpetuity. I've made another request to Minister of Health for a senior care center, which I understand will cost about $1 million to build, and of course come with its operating costs thereafter. But such facilities and the various spendings are necessary to improve lives. Between not spending on these items or cutting spending, I'd rather the government spend prudently, but look for more revenues sources so that we can continue to provide more to improve the quality of life of our people. I believe most Singaporeans can understand why expenditures are rising. The question is, how do we find more revenue to pay for these rising expenditures? Some have suggested, why not increase the share of NIR contribution beyond 50%? And is the government too prudent or conservative in managing the finances? So let me offer my thoughts on this. When I studied civil engineering at the Singapore Polytechnic, one of the structural engineering concepts that I learned was this term known as factor of safety. Essentially, what it means is that whether it is a building or a structure like a bridge or a tower, engineers will design and build structures with load carrying capacity way beyond the expected or intended loads, often between 2 to 3 times. This is to reduce the probability of the structure collapsing due to unforeseen factors to a negligible level, as you can never be 100% sure that the inputs that you use will be 100% captured in the calculations or accurately captured in the calculations. There could be unexpected extreme wind loads or seismic movements due to major earthquakes, for example, nearby, or other possibilities. So buildings and structures are purposely built much more stronger than needed for normal usage, with a factor of safety added to hopefully cater for the extreme, unexpected emergency situations. Similarly, when we look at the long-term finances of a country, shouldn't we also load a factor of safety so that as a country, we will never be caught in a position where we are unable to decisively respond to an unexpected crisis or disaster? Shouldn't we want to ensure that we have the ability to fight back and recover from an extreme risk event? And this risk event could be known unknowns to us or total unknowns to us. It could be weather calamities, severe global or regional economic crisis, or even geopolitical crisis in the region. Look at what happened to Qatar. Last year, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, and Egypt cut diplomatic relations with Qatar and imposed an air, sea, and land blockade with the aim to isolate Qatar's economy. According to estimates by the rating agency Moody's, the Qatari government injected almost $40 billion into the economy just in the first couple of months of the crisis. Qatar's huge reserves has certainly come into play in how they cope with the crisis. We are a tiny state, small island. We are smaller than Qatar in size with no oil or gas underneath us. Our economy heavily dependent on the external trade and investments to sustain our economic livelihood. Any changes to the global economic order or the trade order can have severe direct impact to our economy more than any other countries in the world due to our openness as an economy. And given our inherent circumstances with almost no domestic hinterland, we will always have to be an open economy to seek opportunities. Our domestic consumption can never sustain growth in our economy and will certainly not earn us the foreign currency needed to pay for imports that we need and want. As we transform into a more innovative, more entrepreneurial and internationalized economy, our risk exposure to the volatility of the world markets will increase, not decrease. And the other reality of a small country is that we will always be a price taker in the fiercely competitive world out there. Today, we have a vibrant and viable economy, we have strong export capabilities, and we continue to be able to attract good investment into Singapore. But one day, if this global economic order change and turn against us, or countries decide to impose unfair trade barriers on us, we may really need to count on our reserve to help us buy time to turn around things. This is about survival. So I ask myself, what can go wrong for a country like Singapore to be more conservative in managing our finances? What are the downsides for doing that, and what are the upsides? Our solid financial position helped us maintain one of the few countries in the world with a AAA credit rating. Very few left in the world. It helped us keep our Singapore dollar strong, an important counter-inflation tool. It strengthens our position as an international financial center, ensuring our connectivity and relevance to the world, and of course, creating very good jobs. Perhaps what is even more tangible is that the reserve that our forefathers have painstakingly built up over the decades has generated investment returns, and 50% of it today is the largest contributing revenue, helping to balance our annual budgets. This amounts to about $14.6 billion in FY 2017, which is actually an expansionary injection to the economy, as it's not taking in through tax leakages. Over the last 10 years, the NIR, or previously the NII, contribution of past budgets have added up to more than $100 billion. Imagine us not having NIR contributions or much lesser NIRC. Our spending and subsidies of programs would have been much lower, and or we may have to raise even higher taxes. Parliament have debated the NIR framework in the past and have agreed on the 50-50 split between spending now and saving for the future. This is a fair balance between the current and future generations. I voted in support of the framework then, and my position remains firmly unchanged. It is always tempting to go for the short-term painless solutions. Our forefathers were resolute in not taking this easy path, and so should we. Rather than use more of the returns for current spending, we should let the power of compounding returns do the work by reinvesting the other 50% so as to grow the principal amount of the reserve and contribute to bigger value of the NIRC in the future. Going forward, we actually need bigger NIRC to keep our tax system competitive and, importantly, progressive as well. So what are the downsides of being prudent or conservative? Well, there may indeed be some years where we do collect more taxes than needed, such as in FY 2017. And there are many factors that can result in higher than forecasted surpluses. Among others, the better than expected economic performance, actual expenditure and revenue deviating from the forecast, better investment returns, among others. As the government, like most other governments in the world, adopts a cash accounting approach as opposed to accrual accounting like companies, the annual budget position can be significantly affected when there are changes to payment timings for big-ticket items. Whenever there's a budget surplus situation, the government do have the practice of redistributing the surpluses, whether it is from current budget or past surpluses from current term of government to Singaporeans. The payment of special GST vouchers and the one-off SG bonus are good examples where payouts are tilted in favor of low and middle income. The government have also used surpluses from each term of government to top up endowment funds like the ComCare, the Pioneer Generation Package, and in this year's budget, further top-ups the GSTV fund. This is to accumulate resources so that we can help more Singaporeans when the GST increases come into effect after 2021. So here, I hope that the Finance Minister can affirm this surplus redistribution arrangement as part of our social compact. Besides helping to mitigate the impact of GSTs and rising costs, it can also help manage the income disparity that we see widening in our society. Of course, in the years ahead, we can never be sure of any surpluses or the extent of which, as social expenditure rises and where the additional tax revenue are meant to be used for. However, in years where the country has done well, we should be targeted in distributing the surpluses to the low to middle income. This will give Singaporeans a sense that everyone has a stake in this country and we are all aligned to work together for the betterment of Singapore. This year's budget also sets out with great clarity the framework principles on how the government would fund various spending and how for some of the infrastructure projects, the share of funding can be distributed more equitably across generations. I agree with the Finance Minister that for recurrent spending like healthcare, security, and other social expenditures where it directly benefits current generations, they should be funded with current taxation so that every generation pays its share. This approach would also instill spending discipline, as any further rise in recurring expenditure will have to be funded through more taxes. This inbuilt discipline will help to keep our operating budget sustainable and as well fairer. For the longer-term mega infrastructure projects with high capital investments, the government will set aside surpluses where possible and to use savings accumulated to pay part of the dumpy investment cost. This pre-funding approach demonstrates commitment and ensures that there are sufficient funding for projects with very high capital expenditure, such as the Cross-Island MRT line. I also welcome the new financing approach for projects that generate future economic returns and be undertaken by statutory boards or government-owned companies, where they can look to borrow to finance projects and potentially could draw on the government's guarantee to lower the financing costs of these long-term borrowings. The government is a net creditor and do not need to borrow other than the issuance of the Singapore government securities, which is to help create a risk-free bond market yield curve. However, for the entity that builds the government-invested infrastructure, borrowing at the project level do requires high financing costs because of the risks associated, such as the construction risk. This could result in a negative situation from the government's standpoint, where borrowing rates may be higher than the returns derived from investing the reserves. Hence, it makes smart sense, actually, to tap on the government guarantee to reduce the borrowing costs, and I find this a refreshing approach. Mr. Speaker, it is timely that the Finance Minister set out this funding principle clearly and the thinking behind it. A recent IPS survey with regards to the use of reserve or taxation to pay for social spending suggests that Singaporeans do have an almost equal split view on this issue. We need to talk more on this issue and seek buy-ins from Singaporeans on the approach that the government is taking. Importantly, to expound on our value system about each generation, past, present, and future, doing our part to shoulder the funding of a socially cohesive and economically vibrant future Singapore. To a certain extent, this budget has brought to attention this issue and offers some clarity how we intend to achieve these intergeneration equities. I urge that we continue this conversation. Mr. Speaker, overall, Budget 2018 exhibits traits which make Singapore exceptional, always plan and act for the long-term good of the country. And beyond just about living within our means, Budget 2018 acts to grow the means for better living in the future. So the most balanced way to look at this year's budget is not just seeing from today's standpoint, but imagine that we are in 2030 and looking back at the measures that we have put in place today. With that, Mr. Speaker, I support the budgets.